Hello, everybody, and welcome back to one of our short webinars that we'll be conducting throughout the year. Today's webinar is about auditing the IT governance, and presumably you're all in the works. You're all being prepared for the CIA exam or preparing for the CIA exam. So this webinar will help you in your preparation both for parts 1 and domain 5 and part 3 domain 2. So basically in part 1 domain 5 we talk about governance in general. In part 3 we talk about IT governance in particular, and probably in part 2 here and there you might get a question about the actual auditing of the IT governance process. My name is Wada Halak. I'm a director here with PRC. I'm a lead instructor with PRC, and it'll be my pleasure to accompany you for today's short webinar. So before we start with the presentation, I'd like to put things in perspective. I'd like to explain where we are and why we're talking about IT governance. And before we talk about IT governance, it's critical that we talk about governance in general, and then we will zoom in on IT governance. So when we talk about companies and governance of companies or organizations and governance of organizations, because even not-for-profit or governmental agencies will require governance. Governance pertains to how the stakeholders or the owners or the decision makers of a company manage, govern their companies, govern their organizations. But just for simplicity, we're going to just talk about for-profit organizations, whereas governance can be for any kind of organization. Now, if you have an organization or a company that's owned by one person, this one person would likely be the sole decision maker, the only owner. They will decide on every aspect of the organization. Now, they might delegate that decision to managers or to other employees within the company, but they make all the decisions, even if it is to delegate that decision to somebody else. Now, if we have two partners in a company that own a company, they jointly decide. You will have an agreement between them on who makes the decisions or how the decisions are made. Now, once that grows to thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of shareholders, technically, they are the owners of the company, and they should decide how the company is run and how the company is managed and the major decisions of the company. Now, of course, that cannot feasibly happen. That cannot technically happen. You cannot put 1 million people or 1 million owners in one place and have them make decisions. So what they do is these shareholders end up electing a board. They elect a board of directors. Of course, the larger shareholders will have a bigger say in the election of the board members. And this board jointly, collectively manages or governs the company. Now, any company would typically have objectives, would typically have strategies, would typically have major objectives that they'd like to achieve. Now, in for-profit companies, the single objective of a for-profit company is to maximize shareholder wealth. They look at the decisions. All their decisions are focused around means to maximize the shareholder wealth, the wealth of the owners of the company, be it by increasing profits, be it by increasing value, be it by spending on research and development to create new products, etc. But they all are geared towards maximizing shareholder wealth in the long run. So that is usually the single objective of a for-profit company. And needless to say, everybody under the roof of this company needs to try to achieve the objective. All the collective efforts of every single person within a company must ultimately contribute to the achievement of objectives. And in this case, the achievement of the single objective of maximizing shareholder value. So now governance is the board of directors, tools, procedures, activities that aim to achieve the organizational objective. Now, under the umbrella of the organization, we will have multiple areas, multiple processes, multiple departments, divisions, etc. And one of these areas is internal audit, even though we'd like to see it as a separate, independent function, not under directly the roof, but whether we like it or not, it ultimately reports to the board of directors. So under this roof of governance that's managed by the board of directors of the company, the objectives are to achieve the organizational objectives, and in this case, the maximization of shareholder value. So even the auditor's ultimate objective is to add value and help the organization achieve its objectives. So now we agree on one thing. Everybody within the organization, from the board to the smallest employee to internal audit, aim to achieve the organizational objectives. Now, so this is governance in general. So we'll talk about governance once we start the presentation. Now let's zoom in on IT and the importance of IT governance towards achieving organizational objectives. Now, at one point in time, I don't know whether we should say not too long ago or long ago, maybe 20, 30 years ago, IT used to be a supplement, used to be an added tool, used to be an added advantage of a company. So companies had their own processes, procedures, systems, operating practices, etc. And IT was there to supplement these practices. So for example, in the 30 years ago, if you wanted to write your CIA exam, maybe slightly more, maybe 35 years ago, if you wanted to write your, actually 30 years ago is sufficient. If you wanted to write your CIA exam, the way to go about it is that you would get the address of the IIA, you would communicate with them by mail or by phone and ask them to send you an application. So they will send you an application, you will fill in this application, you will mail back this application to the IIA. The IIA will process your application, process your payment, which used to be maybe a check, and they would send you an exam authorization back by mail, and you will take this authorization with you to the test center on the date of the exam, and you will be allowed to write the exam. Nowadays, this is not how it happens. Nowadays, you have an online system, a CCMS, where you log in, create an account, and access your account, and start uploading your documents, be it your ID or university degree, etc. And you will receive an authorization electronically to do an electronic exam. So while you're doing your exam, once you click end the exam, it will be graded and you'll get the results. So IT is now an integral part of the IIA. In the past, it used to be an extra thing when correcting grades or when storing information for candidates, but they used to have paper files. Now this does not exist. IT is now an integral part. So if I want to be geared towards achieving my organizational objectives, and I want my organization to be governed, IT is an integral part of the organization. And therefore, IT governance becomes an integral part of the overall governance of the organization or of the company. And this is where we're going to start to talk about in the presentation. So let's start with the presentation. Starting with the definition of governance. Now, governance refers to, of course, there are multiple definitions. The IIA defined as the combination of processes and structures implemented by the board. So we need to remember it's the board that is the significant contributor or executor of governance within an organization. Now, of course, we do have outside parties that might influence, but the board is the major player. 2, inform, direct, manage, and monitor activities of the organization, and that is towards the achievement of its objectives. So our ultimate goal of everything we do, or everything the board does, is towards the achievement of the objectives. Now, the key areas within governance, you have the Chief IT Officer, related roles and responsibilities, the accountability and decision-making process, IT performance monitoring and reporting metrics, the Chief Officer's level of understanding of how IT supports and enables the achievement of the organization's strategy objectives, alignment between IT and the organization, and the IT governance, risk, and controls. Let's talk about IT governance, and then this will all make sense. So IT governance consists of leadership, organizational structures, and processes that ensure that the enterprise's information technology, and here's the keyword, supports the organization's strategies and objectives. So we want to make sure that everything we do in IT is directly contributing, directly supporting the achievement of the organization's objectives and the organization's strategies. So this is where IT governance falls in place. We want to make sure that this department or function or area, that's called information technology, which used to be a peripheral activity, a side activity, and now it is an integral part of a business, and in some cases, the only part of a business. And I'll give you an example. eBay, for example, or Amazon, their IT infrastructure is the single most important component of their business. So they might have fulfillment center in the case of Amazon, or nothing in the case of eBay. eBay is a pure platform. Their information technology platform is 100% of their sales, their organizations, their operations, their data, their advertising, etc. It's a single place. It's information technology. For Amazon, which is the online retailer, I'm sure all of you have heard of it or know about it, but it is the online retailer of the world. It's probably the largest online retailer in the world. Their IT infrastructure is the core component of the entire organization. Everything is connected to this IT component. So if something goes wrong with their IT, if their IT is problematic or not achieving the objectives, or it's facing downtime, the entire organization will be shut down. It's equivalent to a retailer that has hundreds of thousands of customers every day with thousands of outlets, shutting down all their outlets at once. So this is how critical it is for the IT infrastructure is becoming in nowadays organizations or companies, and the importance of proper governance or adequate governance of these infrastructures. Now, the relevant IIA standards to the IT governance are the standards 2110, so performance standard 2110. The internal audit activity must assess and make appropriate recommendations for improving the governance process and its accomplishment of the objectives. And usually it's promoting appropriate ethics and values within the organization, ensuring effective organization performance management and accountability. And standard 2110.A2, the internal audit activity must assess whether the IT governance of the organization supports the organization's strategies and objectives. Now, this is the diagram that's also, and the additional guideline reading material, if you'd like, is called GTAG 17, GTAG number 17, which can be downloaded from the website. It's around 24 pages or 26 pages, and it pertains to the auditing of the IT governance. So our role with respect to IT governance is auditing it. Now, we'll talk about this later on, but just remember, we audit. We provide assurance and appropriate consultancy services for or pertaining to or related to IT governance. So where does IT governance fit in? We have the overall enterprise governance, And the IT operations, IT projects, information security are all under the umbrella of IT governance, which is also under the umbrella of the corporate governance. Now, the 5 components of IT governance are the organization and governance structures, the executive leadership and support, the strategic and operational planning, the service delivery and measurement, and IT organization and risk management. So in other words, to achieve organization governance, to assess organization governance, we need to assess those 5 components as they pertain to organization governance. And we're going to talk about each one of these in detail, starting with organization and governance structures. And I'm reading here. We ask ourselves questions as auditors when we're assessing the IT governance. Is there a CIO, a Chief Information Officer, in place? And is he or she a member of the senior management team? Are the structure of the organization's operational components clearly organized such that the IT function can efficiently and effectively help enable the achievement of the organization's objectives? What decision bodies are in place to enable alignment of organization needs with IT services, and do they have adequate empowerment and accountability? Are organizational needs and IT service requirements defined in strategic and tactical plans and monitored? Do the CIO and senior management meet and discuss progress on plans on a regular basis? And are roles and responsibilities clearly defined and communicated? And are the organizational leaders empowered and held accountable for the results? So with respect to organization governance structures, we would assess those 5 major areas about the overall governance and the IT governance and the overall structure within the organization. Do we have the right people in the right place at the right level, talking together, having sufficient authority, having sufficient responsibilities, and these responsibilities are being monitored at a regular level. Now, the second component of IT governance is assessing the executive leadership. And here we're talking about the CEO, the senior management of the company, the tone at the top, and the executive leadership. Are they giving sufficient responsibilities, sufficient authorities to the IT guys? Are they empowering them? Do they communicate with them on a regular basis? So the board, CEO, CIO, and other senior management team members should set a clear vision for the organization, understanding and communicating how IT supports and enables the enterprise to achieve its objectives. This vision should be documented in the form of a strategic plan that defines IT dependencies. Now, the third component is the strategic and operational planning. Are we integrating our IT as part of strategic planning and as part of operational planning? And here, let me give you an example. In 2015, Walmart, and for those of you outside the North American market, Walmart is the largest, or was the largest retailer at one point in time, which used to cater to 60% of households in the US and Canada. So 60% of households in the US and Canada used to get their groceries or used to get their items from Walmart. Now, in 2015, Walmart took a radical shift. They realized, maybe a bit late, that the world is shifting towards online, that Amazon has gained significant grounds in the areas of developing an online store and developing a fulfillment infrastructure that will allow it to cater to millions of orders every day at a very low cost. And they gained a competitive advantage in all the artificial intelligence and all the online platforms and all the IT technology infrastructure that they built. Where Walmart had a very major decision in that they either go online and shift online and be able to catch up, or they're going to lose edge rapidly. Now, only time will tell whether they manage to pick up, but in this pandemic recently, the majority of purchases was turned online, and even those businesses who did not have online started doing online. Now, of course, Amazon had that vision 5 or 10 years before Walmart. And that's why they gained competitive edge. And that's why Amazon now is probably one of the biggest, not one of the biggest, probably the biggest retailer in the world. Back to the slides. Oh, sorry. On to, going back to the strategic and operational planning. So a strategic plan must have integrated or should integrate IT infrastructure into the strategies and then into the operational tactical year-to-year plan. So a strategic plan should define organizational dependencies of IT and the IT function's role and responsibilities in achieving the objectives set forth in the plan. And tactical operating plan aligned with the strategic plan of the organization, providing the mechanisms for how the IT function is measured in terms of supporting and enabling the achievement of goals defined within the strategic plan. Now, next is the service delivery and measurement. And this is where a company must be able to measure the service delivery of its IT components and the availability and dependability and reliability and downtime and response time, etc., of their IT infrastructure. The financial model should be part of performance management used by the organization, which should include IT metrics. How many hours was the, or how many minutes actually was the infrastructure down per day or per hour, etc. This responsiveness speed, all this will be integrated into the financial metrics and the financial operational procedure, operational measurement. An effective performance measurement framework that captures the right quantitative and qualitative data to enable proactive measurement, analysis, and transparency further assures sound IT governance. These metrics will normally include measurements of services delivered to users, customers, and technical and non-technical user satisfaction. So we try to gather information about the availability, the reliability, the security of our IT infrastructure, and the user or customer satisfaction, because the users of the IT infrastructure might be the final customers of the company, or they might be internal customers, so the internal employees who use the day-to-day IT components. And finally, we look at the IT organization risk management. To what degree are the organizational processes automated? How complex is the IT infrastructure and how many applications are in use? Are data standardized and easily shared across applications and the IT infrastructure? Are there standard IT hardware, software, and service procurement policies, procedures, and controls in place? How mature are the IT management processes and recognized frameworks used, such as the Audit IT Governance Framework, the ITIL IT Service Management Framework, or the ISO 20000? And how are risks management managed in relation to meeting organization needs, security and compliance requirements, and what's the strategic importance of IT? So back to where we started, we will need to look at and assess those 5 components of the IT governance in order to obtain an understanding. Now, is there any right or wrong? Anything, this is how it should be, this is how it should not be? Actually, there isn't. But strategically, the future is IT, the future is information technology, the future is automating artificial intelligence, less labor, more machines, more IT, more robots, etc. So the more we are integrating IT into our strategic business, the more we will be competitive and the longer we will last in business. And the reason why I'm saying the longer we will last in business is because if you look around you, probably 60 or 70% of companies today did not exist 10 years ago. And 60 and 70% of companies today might not exist 10 years from now. So existence will significantly depend on how successfully, how quickly, how efficiently, how effectively companies are utilizing technology to operate and to run and to manage their businesses. Now, back to the presentation, IT governance characteristics and benefits, enhancing the relationship between the organization and the IT, enterprise risk management of the organization IT, visibility into IT management's ability to achieve its objectives, and IT governance improves the adaptability of IT to changes in the organization and the IT environment. So the roles and responsibilities, and here we're talking about the roles and responsibilities with respect to any process within the organization. Any process within the organization falls under the roof of the organization. It is ultimately the responsibility of the board and senior management. So the primary responsibility is the board and senior management for IT governance. The role of the internal audit, internal assurance or internal audit activity would be the assessing whether the organization's IT governance supports the organization's strategies and objectives. So assessing and probably providing assurance services and probably providing consultancy services. Now, what is our role in IT governance in detail? We will look at the performance versus the compliance. We will look at developing the IT governance audit plan, the organizational governance structures, the executive leadership and support, the strategic and operational planning, service delivery and measurement, and the IT organization risk management. We're going to talk about each one of these or read about each one of these in detail. So with respect to performance versus compliance, determine whether the IT function aligns with and understands the organization's objectives and strategies, determine the effectiveness of IT resource and performance management, and assess risks that may adversely affect the IT environment. So we want to make sure that our IT is aligned with strategies and is working in parallel towards the achievement of the organizational objectives. With respect to developing the IT governance audit plan, follow established performance standards as outlined in the 2200 series of standards that cover engagement planning. Standard 2200 states internal auditors must develop and document a plan for each engagement, including the engagement's objectives, scopes, timing, and resources. And you have practice advisories. One of them pertains directly for a conceptual framework for understanding and executing the IT governance audit plan, and using professional judgment in developing their own IT governance audit engagement plan, and should be receptive to the uniqueness of their organization's control environment strategies and objectives. Now, next we look at the organization governance structures, reviewing the organizational structure to identify whether there is a CIO in place and whether this person is a member of the senior management team, assessing the degree to which governance activities and standards are consistent with the internal audit activities understanding of the organization's risk appetite, consulting engagements as allowed by the internal audit charter and approved by the board, ongoing dialogues with the IT governance activity to ensure that substantial organizational risk changes are being addressed in a timely manner, and formal audits of the IT governance activity consistent with standard 2110. Of course, you don't need to remember the numbers of the standards. You don't need to remember a lot of that. We'll talk about what you need to remember towards the end. Now, standards 2130, the internal audit activity must evaluate the adequacy and effectiveness of controls in responding to risks within the organization's governance, operations, and information systems regarding the reliability and integrity of financial operational information. So with respect to IT, we want to make sure we are getting reliable and information with integrity from the system, the effectiveness and the efficiency of the operations, the safeguarding of assets, and the compliance with laws, regulations, and contracts with respect to protecting information, saving information, storing information, etc. With respect to strategic and operational planning, we will look at the standard states the internal audit activity must assess whether the IT governance of the organization supports the organization's strategies and objectives, conduct governance-related audits, including assessing whether IT governance sustains and supports the organization's strategies and objectives. The internal auditor may find that an IT governance program is not in place, or in other cases may find ones in place that are adequately designed and controlled or under or over controlled. And we look at the organization's IT governance program, whether it should have sufficient performance components that tell management whether IT is being governed adequately such that strategic goals are being achieved. Next, we have service delivery and measurement. Do the board and senior management have a true understanding of IT costs and how they contribute to the achievement of strategic goals and objectives of the organization, outcomes on both top and bottom line? Do organizational unit leaders measure IT deliverables and value received, and how? How do IT costs compare to other organizations of similar size and within the same industry? Are financial analysis performed as part of cost-benefit studies for larger IT investments, and are organizational unit leaders and the CIO measured on both financial and non-financial performance? And finally, we look at the IT organization risk management. Once internal audit is sufficiently satisfied with the design of IT governance, audit testing should focus on the degree to which the program is operating consistent with Standard 2110. This includes reviews of management reporting, exceptions, approvals and documentation, risk assessments, consistency, effective use of metrics, timely updates based on emerging organization needs and external changes, board and committee meetings, committee meeting minutes, strategies and plans, organization changes, and interviews with management. Now, before we move on to the last section of the presentation, let me stop here and just give you how this is being applied or how it works in the real world. Now, some of you may have realized or are becoming aware that governance is becoming an increasingly important function within the organization, to the extent that you are seeing in larger companies, in more mature companies, a separate governance function, a separate governance assurance department. Just like we have an internal audit activity that's independent, that reports directly to an audit committee, companies are increasingly moving towards having a separate governance function that reports to the board of directors. Now, how is this affecting internal audit? And in fact, it's becoming a clash of the titans. Basically, you have an independent governance function and an independent internal audit function. What's the relationship between them? Now, internal audit is one of the governance functions, but also internal audit may provide assurance on governance. So where do we draw the line? Who's higher than who? What's the hierarchy? And there is no answer to that. So what's happening between the two functions is that depending on the company, depending on the maturity of the department, depending on of activity, depending on who is a more knowledgeable and a stronger leader, whether it's the governance, the head of governance, or the head of internal audit, who does the board listen to more, who is closer to the board. This is what's impacting whether the internal audit function reports to or is underneath governance, or whether internal audit is higher than the governance function, or whether they are on the same level and they communicate and collaborate and talk to each other. Now, of course, we as internal auditors would prefer that the functions are parallel, that both functions are independent functions contributing towards better governance, contributing towards the more effective and efficient achievement of organizational objectives. However, there is no one size that fits all. There are a lot of factors that go into play, and ultimately the responsibility for both internal audit and governance lies with the board of directors. It's the board of directors that will govern, that will set the roles, define the responsibilities, define the communication criteria between both functions. Thank you very much for joining us today for this short webinar, and hopefully we hope it added value to your preparation and your understanding of governance as it pertains to the CIA.